I was standing right there when he said it. A full room, my brother's wedding, champagne pouring, people laughing, and he raised his glass, looked right at me and said, "One son's a doctor, the other, well, a lowly soldier." They laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than saying nothing. My own father made me a punchline, and not one person stood up for me. Not even my brother, not even my mother, and I smiled like it didn't burn. Welcome back to the channel. This is where we tell the stories no one else dares to say out loud. The quiet betrayals, the silent revenge, the moments we carry long after the room forgets. If you've ever been pushed aside by the people you gave everything to, sit down. This story, it's yours too. Before the wedding, my life was simple. Not perfect, not loud, but steady. I lived in a small rented duplex on the edge of town. Neighbors who waved, mornings that smelled like old coffee and rain-wet pavement. My world was quiet, a creaky front step, a calendar with reminders to call mom, a kitchen drawer with my brother's graduation card still tucked inside. I was that kind of man, the one who sends birthday texts even when no one replies, the one who shows up early and stands in the back. I worked the night shift at the VA hospital, came home before the sun, made black coffee, toast, sometimes eggs, sat by the window with the blinds half open, watching the world wake up without me. There was peace in it, and maybe a little ache I never admitted out loud. But there was duty too. I served, I gave, I never asked for applause. If you needed help, I was there. If you forgot me, I forgave you. That's who I was. So when the wedding came up, my brother's big day, I didn't expect much. I bought a new shirt, cleaned my boots, didn't ask to give a speech, didn't ask to be noticed. I just showed up. Because that's what I've always done. I was the quiet son, the soldier, the one no one clapped for, but everyone counted on. At that wedding there were smiles, but not all of them were real. You learn to spot the difference after a while. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that disappears the second you look away. My brother Jason, he was always the favorite. Sharp jawline, clean suit, med school diploma, fiancé with a perfect laugh. He didn't even have to try. He walked into a room and people reached for his hand. I walked into a room and people reached for their drinks. Still, I loved him. When we were kids, I'd stand up for him on the playground. He never had to throw a punch. I took them all for him. Now he throws glances like darts. Quiet, sharp, unspoken, and walks away like nothing happened. And then there was mom. Kind, soft-spoken, but always watching dad before she reacted. Like she needed his permission to feel anything. At the wedding, she wore a blue dress I bought her last year. Said nothing when I complimented her, just nodded. She touched my shoulder when I walked in, but didn't look me in the eye. Sometimes silence says more than words ever will. Dad, you'll hear more about him soon enough. But let's just say this. He's the kind of man who loves legacy, not loyalty. Applause, not effort. And titles more than time. He raised us like we were trophies. Except I was the one that never made the shelf. The rest of the room? Family, old friends, former teachers. The kind who once said, he'll come around. And now they just say, oh, he came. I remember my cousin's wife. She smiled at me too long and too tight, like she'd rehearsed it. And Uncle Rob? He leaned in during cocktail hour, whispered, still in uniform, huh? With that half smirk I'd seen since I was 17. Everyone there had a line ready for Jason. For me, they had polite distance. It wasn't just the toast that broke me. It was the way they all looked at me like I wasn't part of the story. Like I was a side note in a room full of headlines. But I was there, suit pressed, boots clean, shoulders back, just not invited into the narrative. For a long time I told myself I didn't need much. A roof, a clean uniform, a few good friends who knew what silence meant. But if I'm honest, there was one thing I always wanted. Just once, I wanted my father to be proud of me. Not the kind of pride that shows up on Facebook. Not the forced thank you for your service when strangers shake your hand. I wanted the quiet kind. The kind that lives in a father's eyes when he looks at his son and sees something good. The kind that doesn't need to be said, because you can feel it in the way he stands next to you. But I never got that. Instead, I got nods, dismissals, the occasional grunt of approval when I fixed something around the house. My medals? Tucked in a drawer. My service? Called a phase. And it wasn't just him. It was what his opinion did to the rest of them. If he didn't respect me, they didn't either. Like pride only flowed one way, and I was standing upstream with an empty cup. There was a time I wanted my little nephew to look at me like a hero. Wanted my mom to speak up when dad crossed a line. Wanted my brother to say, you know what? He's done more for this country than I've done in any hospital. I wanted someone, just one person, to say out loud what I spent years bleeding for, that I mattered. But I guess what I wanted most was smaller than all that. I just wanted to belong at the table. Not because of what I could provide. Not because I stayed quiet. But because I was enough. And somewhere deep down, even as I laughed at the jokes, lifted the bags, paid my part, I was still that boy waiting for his father to notice he was in the room. It didn't start with the toast. No, it started weeks before that. Quiet things, barely there. Jason stopped replying to my messages. Nothing dramatic, just fewer words, longer delays. Busy with wedding stuff became the blanket excuse. I asked if he needed help with the setup. He said they already had people. He said it with a smile, but not the kind I remembered from when we used to laugh at Dad behind the shed. Then came the group thread for family updates. Funny how my name was there, but the messages never really were for me. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. "We'll see you there" to everyone but me. Even Mom started acting like she had somewhere else to be when I called. There was a registry list sent out, everyone picking gifts, pitching in. No one asked if I could contribute. They just assumed I would. But when I sent something nice, no one thanked me. Not even a message, just silence. And the worst part, it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like I was being erased. Softly, slowly, like a name being rubbed off a whiteboard one letter at a time. Even at the rehearsal dinner, something was off. Jason hugged everyone. With me it was a pat, not even a full one. His fiancée said thanks for making it out, like I'd flown in from a war zone. I lived 15 minutes away. It wasn't just cold shoulders. It was disappearing space. Like every step I took closer to them, the floor moved back. And somewhere deep down, I knew something was coming. I just didn't know it would happen under chandelier light, with 120 people watching. Before the cold shoulders, before the title of lowly soldier, we were something else. Me and Jason, brothers. I still remember when we shared a room growing up. He'd sneak candy under the blanket, and I'd cover for him when Dad checked on us. We had our own language back then, our own look, our own signal for when things got bad between Mom and Dad. I was the buffer, the blocker, the one who kept him laughing when the house got too loud. I taught him how to tie a necktie. He called me before every first date until college. He used to say, "If I ever get married, you're standing right beside me." I didn't forget that. Even when I left for basic training, he cried harder than Mom, said don't let them break you. He sent me letters for the first 6 months, drew funny comics, sent me socks, and when I came back, I looked for him in the crowd. He didn't come, said he had exams, but I didn't hold it against him, because back then, he was still my brother. Back then, I still believed loyalty didn't need to be loud, it just needed to be real. And my mom, she wasn't always this quiet. When I got injured overseas, she didn't leave the hospital for 2 days. She held my hand while I slept, said she was proud of me, said Dad didn't know how to show it. I believed her. I held on to those words like a life jacket, for years, even as she stopped saying them. And Dad, he wasn't always this hard. He once carried me 3 blocks when I broke my ankle, said real men carry their own weight, but sometimes we carry each other. I've carried that line in my spine ever since. I used to believe we were a family, messy, distant, but still tethered by something more than DNA. But now, I see it clearer. I was the tether. I held it all together, and no one noticed, until I let go. The room was golden, not metaphorically, literally. Soft lights hanging like melted stars, wine glasses catching the glow, waiters in pressed shirts walking slow like it was sacred. Everything looked like celebration. I stood near the back, like always, didn't push to be at the front, didn't ask for a mic, just happy to be there, proud of Jason, proud of what this day meant. Then they called for the speeches. Jason went first, spoke about love, about how she changed his life. He cried a little, she wiped it away. The room melted. Then Dad stood up. He held his glass like it was made of something holy, looked around the room like it was his kingdom, and then he began. "I always hoped both my boys would make something of themselves," he said. Laughter, one of them did. More laughter, louder, a doctor, a husband, a real man. People clapped. Then he looked at me, not directly, just in my direction. And the other, well, he wore a uniform, followed orders, still figuring it out. The room tensed, a few nervous chuckles, some heads turned, one person coughed. "But we love him too." He smiled, took a long sip, sat down like he just won something. No one said anything. Not Jason, not Mom, not even the best man. I looked at my plate. The steak was half cut, still bleeding, kind of like me. I stood up, said I needed the restroom, walked past the floral archway, past the cake, past the table with my name misspelled, out the door, into the dark, and I didn't come back, because that wasn't a toast, that was a eulogy. For the version of me they still pretended to respect. I didn't drive off right away, just sat there, engine humming, headlights lighting up the edge of a parking lot full of cars that weren't mine. The wedding music was still playing inside, muted by glass, but I could still hear the beat, the laughter, like I never existed. I looked down at my hands, still resting in my lap, the same hands that once changed a tire in a sandstorm, the same ones that carried men out of burning buildings. And now, they just sat there, still, cold. I don't know how long I stayed like that, long enough for the windshield to fog up, long enough for the world to forget I was outside. And I just kept asking myself, how the hell did we get here? When did I go from protector to punchline, from brother to background? I gave my best years to people who never clapped for me. And that night, it hit me. Maybe they weren't clapping because they didn't know what I gave. Maybe they never asked, never wanted to know. I don't cry easy. Not anymore. But something in me cracked open that night. Not loudly, not with tears, just a quiet split in something I used to believe in. That family meant something. That loyalty earned respect. That showing up year after year, quietly, faithfully, meant you were seen. I was wrong. They only saw me when they needed something moved, paid for, or kept quiet. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't want to go back in. The ignition was still on, but I was already gone. They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from someone you die for. But what they don't say is how often it's built on things you did quietly. Things no one clapped for. Things they now act like never happened. 3 years ago, Jason called me, panicked, credit cards maxed out, school loans due. He'd been helping pay for his fiance's nursing degree, and the stress was eating him alive. I didn't hesitate, moved some savings, called in a favor from an old buddy at the credit union, transferred the money that same week. He said thank you once, never brought it up again. When Dad's back went out, who drove him to every appointment, sat in the waiting room while he cursed the nurses, picked up his prescriptions, stocked his fridge, changed out his tires for winter? Me, not Jason, not even Mom. And when Jason got that job at the hospital, guess who wrote the letter that helped seal it? Guess who vouched for him, with the director, an old commanding officer who owed me his life? He doesn't even remember that. Or maybe he does. Maybe he just likes the version of the story where I'm the shadow, and he's the star. Funny how people forget the hands that held them up once they've learned how to stand on their own. I wasn't looking for recognition. I didn't do those things for applause. But that night when Dad raised that glass and made me a punchline, it hit me. Maybe I was the only one who remembered what I gave. And maybe it was time I stopped giving. And didn't plan to cut them off. Not that night. Not even the week after. I still held on to some small thread. Something stupid and heavy and hopeful. That maybe it was a bad joke. Maybe someone would call. Maybe someone would say he went too far. But no one did. Then one morning, I checked my mail. Not email. Real mail. The kind that feels heavier when bad news hides in paper. It was from the family attorney. No warning. No call. Just a thick envelope with my name barely spelled right. I opened it, thinking it was something routine. It wasn't. It was a revised version of my father's will. The original one, the one where he split everything evenly between me and Jason, gone. This new one said everything. House, land, stocks, pension was going to Jason. And under military pension consideration, a handwritten note, already compensated through service. No signature, just a scribble, like I was some footnote in my own bloodline. I sat with that paper for an hour. Didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. Just read it over and over until the words blurred into noise. And that's when it happened. That's when the last string in me snapped. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the will. It was the message underneath it all. That I was never supposed to inherit anything from that man. Not land, not legacy, not love, just silence. And I thought, if they want to pretend I was never part of the story, maybe it's time I write my own chapter. I didn't yell, didn't call anyone, didn't draft a long message I'd regret, or delete, didn't storm into Dad's office demanding answers. I just sat at my kitchen table, stared at that will, and felt everything inside me go still. It was the stillness that scared me most. Not anger, not heartbreak, just this quiet knowing that I was done. The next morning, I got dressed like it was any other Tuesday. Boots laced tight, shirt pressed, face calm, walked into my bank, closed a joint account they didn't know I could access, called the lawyer who handled my grandfather's estate, asked for a favor, pulled old receipts, dates, transfers, every quiet act of support I'd given, documented now with signatures. Still didn't say a word to them. They posted photos from the honeymoon. I didn't comment. Jason texted me once about grabbing a drink soon. I left it on red. I wasn't angry. I was exact. Because sometimes the sharpest move you can make is no move they can see coming. I started drawing lines in places they didn't know existed. Not to hurt them, to protect what was left of me. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was a reckoning. Quiet. Focused. And this time it was mine. They didn't notice when I stopped answering calls. Didn't notice when I took my name off the family cabin deed. Dad bragged about for years. Didn't even blink when I stopped paying the taxes on it. Because they'd been running everything through my military exemption. I didn't yell. Didn't post a thing. I just backed away from the table. The joint insurance policy, canceled. The account Jason used when he needed to borrow during med school, frozen. And when I mailed copies of my financial support receipts to the family attorney, with timestamps in every cent I covered for Jason's education, I didn't include a note. I let the paperwork speak. I started recording calls. Not because I planned to use them, but because I knew how they rewrite stories. This time, I'd have the truth saved in my own voice. Mom called once, said Dad had been in a mood lately. Said he was feeling like you're pulling away. I said, maybe he's finally feeling what I felt for years. Jason texted about needing help filing taxes. I sent him a PDF link. No message. That was the moment he realized the shift wasn't temporary. I wasn't upset. I was unavailable. They thought I'd come back. I always did. But while they toasted to their legacy, I was pulling my name out of everything they built it on. And the best part, they didn't see it coming. Because the son who doesn't speak is the one they forget to watch. Some nights I still sit at the kitchen table, lights low, coffee cold, and I wonder if it was worth it. All of it. The documents, the distance, the silence they still don't understand. Sometimes I ask myself, what if I'd just let them have it all? The land, the name, the table I was never really invited to sit at. What if I had just bowed out with grace and kept my hands clean? Would that have made me the better man? Or just the forgotten one? I didn't do any of this for revenge. Not really. I did it to finally stop bleeding in places no one cared to bandage. But still, there's a weight that comes with choosing yourself. A heaviness in saying, I don't want your apology. I want my peace. Because when you've been quiet your whole life, the first time you say no feels like war. Even if all you did was stop showing up. Maybe I should have walked away. But part of me needed them to see it. Not my anger, not my pain, but the space I once filled that now echoes without me. That's not revenge. That's memory. And sometimes the loudest justice is just absence. The funny thing about people who think they've won is they celebrate too early. A few weeks after I pulled everything out, they hosted another party, not a wedding this time. A family dinner, big crowd, big smiles, big plans. Jason stood up, gave a speech about legacy again, talked about honoring Dad's sacrifices, and keeping the family estate in responsible hands. He was already wearing the crown. What he didn't know was that 2 days earlier, the deed to that land had been reassigned. I sold my share to someone he didn't know, not for profit, just to make sure he couldn't touch it. And Dad, he bragged that night about cleaning up loose ends, called me the silent one, and said it with pride as if silence meant weakness. But someone at that dinner, someone who didn't mean to, was recording on their phone, and they caught every word, every smug sentence, every proud insult, and someone sent it to me. I didn't post it, didn't forward it, just watched it, alone, once, and then I smiled, because in that room full of clapping hands and raised glasses, they didn't even know they'd said too much, too loud, too late. It's funny, you spend years giving everything to people who see you as a tool, but all it takes is one moment, one smug sentence, to show the world who they really are. They overplayed their hand, celebrated before the game ended, and me, I wasn't angry anymore. I was already gone. It didn't make the news, didn't go viral, didn't spark any dramatic calls. It just happened. Like rain falling on a roof they forgot had holes in it. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, certified envelope, signature required. Inside a formal notice revoking Jason's access to the shared property trust. Turns out I'd retained a clause, buried deep in a clause of a clause, that required my signature on any land development or sale. Without it, they couldn't build, couldn't refinance, couldn't even list the address on a public permit. The second came a few days later. This one, an invoice, a formal request for reimbursement for the exact amount I loaned Jason in 20, with interest. It wasn't about the money. It was about memory, about putting a paper trail behind the silence he tried to paint over. And finally the third drop, a notice to the family lawyer, removing my father as medical proxy. Quiet, legal, final, because trust, that was already gone. There were no threats, no letters stuffed with rage, just signatures, dates, clarity. They called, of course. Jason left voicemails. Mom texted. Even Dad tried to leave a message once. His voice brittle, like the sound of a man who finally realized he no longer had control. I didn't respond, because some storms don't need thunder. They just need time. And justice, real justice, doesn't knock. It walks in, quiet, legal, and undeniable. You'd expect screaming, accusations, anger, some big final showdown to match the damage they did. But that's not what happened. They went quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room faster than sound ever could. Jason tried to call first, didn't leave a message, just hung up. 3 missed calls, then nothing. Mom sent a text, "We're confused. Can we talk?" I read it, didn't answer, because she wasn't confused. She was just shocked that this time, I didn't come back. Dad didn't say a word, not a call, not a note, just vanished from the conversation. And for the first time in my life, his silence didn't shrink me. It freed me. At the next family gathering, I didn't go. They posted photos anyway, but the smiles looked thinner. The table had more space than they expected. I heard from a cousin weeks later, said Jason looked off. Said Dad sat in the corner the whole time, didn't speak much. It's funny, they thought I was the quiet one, but it turns out I was just the one they leaned on without noticing. And now they know. I didn't need to raise my voice. Didn't need to slam doors. All I did was walk away and take myself with me. And the look on their faces when they realized I wasn't coming back. That was louder than anything they ever said to me. I'm not the man who walked into that wedding with polished boots and a quiet hope of being seen. That man was still waiting for a seat at someone else's table. Still trying to earn applause from people who never learned how to clap for anyone but themselves. No, I'm someone else now. Not bitter, not angry, just clear. I still wake up early, still make coffee too strong, still walk to the window and let the morning spill in. But now I don't check my phone for their names. I don't keep space in my calendar just in case. I don't carry old stories around like unpaid debts. These days my world is smaller. But it's quieter, and it's mine. I stopped needing their approval the day I realized my life wasn't built for their comfort. It was built through sacrifice, through silence, through every step I took when no one was watching. I'm not the forgotten one anymore. I'm the man who remembered who he was when no one else did. That's the change they never expected. Not that I disappeared, but that I finally appeared on my own terms. And the truth is, I don't need a seat at their table anymore. I built my own, and it's standing solid, even if no one else claps when I sit down. The jacket was nothing special. Army green, worn at the elbow, a stitch missing at the hem where I once caught it on barbed wire overseas. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't clean, but it was mine. I wore it the night of the wedding. Not during the ceremony, of course. I brought it in the car, just in case it got cold. I didn't know I'd need it that night. Not because of the weather, but because the room turned colder than I expected. After the toast, when I walked out, I didn't grab my gift. Didn't say goodbye, but I did grab that jacket, pulled it over my shoulders like armor, walked into the night with something that had seen more battles than anyone in that room ever would. I've kept it since, still folded in the same spot by my door, still smells like the sand from my last deployment. Some days I think about tossing it, starting fresh, but because that jacket was with me when no one else was. It sat with me through silence, held my shaking hands when I read that will, stayed on my back when I started pulling my name from everything they built. It's not just fabric, it's proof that I was there, that I stood, even when they tried to cut me down with a joke and a glass of champagne. So no, I won't throw it away, because while they toasted titles and laughed at the man in the jacket, that jacket was holding up a soldier. And in the end, it walked out of that room with more dignity than any of them carried in. I didn't go back. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even when the messages turned from confusion to guilt. I stayed away because sometimes the only way to stop being hurt is to stop walking back into the fire and calling it home. Let them keep their table, their toasts, their revised stories. I have mine, and that old green jacket still hangs by the door, because while they tried to erase me, they forgot one thing. I kept the blueprint, and I walked away with everything they built on my back. Sometimes I sit with it longer than I should. Not the silence, not the papers, not the jacket, but the question, was I wrong to protect what was mine? To draw a line after years of crossing theirs just to stay close? To finally say no, not in anger but in clarity? I didn't raise my voice, didn't take more than I gave. I just stopped bleeding for people who brought knives to dinner and called it tradition. But still, there's that voice in the back of my mind. What if you'd just stayed quiet? What if you hadn't answered with paper and distance? Would they love you more now? Would they say your name with less weight? I don't know. Maybe you don't either. But if you've ever asked yourself the same thing, if you've ever sat with the guilt of protecting your peace instead of preserving someone else's comfort, then you know the truth. Sometimes protecting what's yours looks a lot like betrayal to the people who once lived off your silence. And if that makes me the villain in their version of the story, so be it. They thought I'd fold quietly. They thought I'd keep showing up. Smile tight, hands full, heart empty. They thought silence meant surrender. But they forgot something. I was the quiet one, not the weak one. And while they laughed, while they planned, while they toasted to what they took, I was watching. I just waited until they handed me the rope. And I didn't swing it. I didn't shout with it. I just let them pull. If someone ever laughed while you broke in half, if they called your sacrifice small, just because they couldn't measure it in applause, if they clapped for someone else, while you stood with everything holding you together by a thread, then this story was yours too. If you fed people who later called you a burden, if you paid the bill and they still left your name off the invitation, if they told your story without your name in it, you're not alone. You don't have to shout to reclaim your peace. You don't have to prove anything to people who only clapped when it was convenient. You don't owe anyone your silence. You never did. They forgot something. You kept the blueprint, and if you've got the blueprint, you can rebuild anything,
even yourself. Comment below if they ever tried to erase you. Tell your story because someone else needs it. And if you've ever chosen peace over proving your point, subscribe. 5 months passed before anyone realized I wasn't coming back. 5 months of empty chairs I used to fill. 5 months of silence they kept calling pride. The messages stopped eventually. No more questions. Just distance. But time has a strange way of peeling back pain. The longer I stayed gone, the more cracks started to show. Jason made a post. Something about family and loyalty. He never named me. Didn't have to. 2 years ago I was the one writing checks, fixing roofs, pulling weeds at the family cabin before the holidays. Now, they don't even know where the keys are kept. I heard through someone else that Dad's health started to slip. I didn't go. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I spent my best years sitting beside a man who never looked at me long enough to know what he lost. The years didn't make me colder. They just made me clearer. And sometimes time doesn't heal anything. It just strips away the excuses, until all that's left is the truth you didn't want to see, and the man you became because of it. I've told you my story, but maybe it wasn't just mine. Maybe it sounded like yours too. So let me ask you something. Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have spoken up the moment they laughed? Would you have forgiven it again? Or would you have quietly started packing your dignity, one decision at a time? What would you do if the people you fed with your own hands turned and starved you? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you wait until they handed you the rope and didn't realize what they gave you? Ever been erased by the very people you showed up for? Ever had to pretend you didn't notice when your name disappeared from the story? If any of that hit somewhere deep, then maybe this story wasn't just about me. Maybe it was a blueprint for every man who built the house and was still asked to knock on the door. Drop your story below. Don't hold it in anymore. We're listening.